So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name's Ryan Wunderlich. I have been using AutoCAD across multiple industry segments for about 35 years this year. I'm currently a senior support specialist, so when you call in to us for technical support, I am one of the people that you will be talking to. I've taught AutoCAD as a certified instructor. I've had more than 15 years in CAD management. I've done over 8 years in cruise ship building. I've done 5 years of support in civil, survey, landscape architecture. I've pretty much run the gamut for industries. The only thing I haven't done is aerospace. And I have a bachelor's in business management and a master's in organizational management. So real quick, we're going to talk about XREFs today. So the first thing we're going to talk about is XREF Pathing, absolute, relative, and none, and what it means to you. We're going to talk about some of the XREF variables and their usage. And then we're going to talk about the big one, common issues and things to know. Kevin, you should have audio. Check your volume settings and make sure that you're going through the right place. I'm not muted and I can hear everyone, or I can hear the other presenter, so I know that my audio is going. And then once we cover the common issues and things to know, we're going to talk about some of the best practices that I have come up with over the years. So the first thing is what we're going to talk about the basics, right? What is an external reference? So an external reference is a method to import drawings in a way that keeps the imported drawings independent of current drawings. This type of file is called an external reference, or XREF. The XREF does not become part of the drawing database and is loaded simultaneously with other drawings in which is it imported. Unlike inserting a block, where a block becomes part of the drawing and is not updated when the source block is updated. So any changes you make in an XREF appear in any drawings where that XREF is being used. All of these things we should know. So how to attach an XREF: in the Insert tab, right up here, under the Reference panel, you click the Attach button. If you have the XREF palette open, you can also click on the button here and click Attach DWG. You select the DWG you want to XREF, and then you will get this dialog box, okay? This is where you set the various options. So this is where you can set scale. This is where you can set path in the blue. This is where you can set the insertion point in purple, rotation in green, and reference type is in the gray box here. Scale, insertion point, and rotation are just like inserting blocks. There is no difference here. If you want to scale it, you can scale it here. You can also scale it once you've inserted it. Rotation, same thing. You can specify on screen or automatically have it rotate to 0. Same with the insertion point. The big thing that we're going to be talking about is the path type and the reference type here. So XREF pathing, this is one of the things that gets people into the most amount of trouble. When opening up a drawing that contains an XREF, it's going to see if the XREF drawing can be located using the path that's stored in the DWG that you open. So there are 3 pathing methods here. We've got a full path, AKA also known as absolute path. This will include the drive letter and all the folder details. So for example, D:// folder, /folder, / etc., so on and so forth. Okay, this can map to a UNC path, so / server name, / share folder, etc. Relative path uses the location of the DWG as its start point, and then allows you to navigate to where that XREF is either by going to a / and then a folder, or you can go .. / to go up folders, and no path, which the XREF must be located in the same folder as the DWG you opened. So the default path whenever you start AutoCAD out of the box is the relative path. Is the ref path type system variable to change that path style if you want it. I personally use relative paths. I prefer them because it makes things a lot easier, and I'll show you that a little later on why that's so important. So when using a full path, if any of the folder names change, you lose the path to the XREF and need to redefine that path in order to find the XREF. Also, if you move the folder with the XREFs, you also lose those paths. So if you move the drawing and that XREF folder to another folder, you won't be able to find any of that stuff. When using relative paths, as long as the DWG you've opened and the location of the XREFs to that DWG remain the same, it will open every time. When moving up one or more folders in the folder tree, you may have some issues finding that XREF path when using relative paths. I generally recommend that you don't want to go out of the drawing path or where the DWG is located, I generally recommend that you don't want to go back a path and then to a folder. I usually recommend having an XREF folder in a tree under the DWG location, and I'll talk more about that as well. And when using a no path, so the XREF must be located in the exact same folder as the DWG you opened in order for it to find it. So this is where we set our relative path here. And again, by default, it's relative path. And then we're going to talk about the other one. So the other one here was the gray one where we talk about attachment versus overlay. This is the other big thing that people need to understand. When you attach an XREF, that means that any drawing that you use that DWG for that has the attached XREF, the XREF comes with. This is called nesting XREFs. Okay, there are some inherent issues with nesting XREFs, and I'll show you some specific examples of why that can be problematic. When you use an overlay, the XREFs that you have are ignored when that drawing is XREF'd into another drawing. So what this means is that if I have DWG, and I'll show you this, and then the default is controlled by the XREF type system variable. When it's set to 0, attaches the default. This is also the default setting, so attaches by definition the default that AutoCAD's going to use. I generally recommend to set this to 1 unless you have a need to nest the XREFs in such a way. It's critical, this is very critical to understand. When you use overlays, I can XREF drawing A into drawing B, then I can open up drawing B and XREF drawing A into it. If you XREF either of drawing A or drawing B into drawing C, it will only bring B or A, it will not bring both. If you use attachment and you can XREF drawing A into B or B into A, but you cannot do both. So I can XREF DWG-A into DWG-B, but as soon as I use attachment, I can't XREF DWG-B into A because it creates what's called a circular reference error. And then when I load DWG-B that has A XREF'd in it, it will automatically, when I bring that into DWG-C, it will load B and A into that drawing. And as a general rule, and things that I've done in my life and how I've set things up with CAD standards, I always recommend to use overlay unless there's an absolute need to use attachment. It creates fewer problems down the road. So demonstration of pathing and attachment versus overlay. So we're just going to go through a quick demonstration here. So what you're going to see here is I have DWG-A, and you'll see I have a couple of lines here. You'll see that this line, and this line are all set to color by layer, and they're on different layers. This line is set to its own color, okay? And when I bring this into DWG-B, right, so I've done this here, and let me bring up my XREF dialog so you can see how DWG-A was brought in. So DWG-A was brought in as an attachment. So this is not an overlay, this is an attachment. One of the things we're going to talk about as well is how we talk about some of the other variables like VisRetain and XREF override, and those will come sooner. So what I actually did in this drawing is that I actually overrode these layer properties here. The other thing to really understand, if we go back to DWG-A, this blue line is on layer 0, and layer 0 is blue. When I bring this into any other drawing, it inherits the properties of the layer 0 of that drawing. So this will actually change to white. Even though it's blue in the initial, it becomes white because it's on layer 0. So you'll see I have some XREFs here with some overrides of just the layer colors. And then if I go into drawing C where I've XREF'd B that has this, you will see that those layer overrides disappear. That's one of the dangers of attaching, is that if I'm in DWG-B and I override these layer colors here, right? So if we open up the layer dialog, you'll see that DWG layer 1, 2, and 3 have all been overridden to yellow. Because this is an attached XREF, when I bring this into C, it does not bring any of those colors over. This is one of the things, so I would actually have to go back into my layer dialog for C to reset those to yellow if I need them a different color than what they come with. Okay, So that's a quick piece here. And the other thing I want to show you is that in my DWGB, when I did the XREF, I XREF this using a full path, right? Webinar, XREF here, it's a full path. So because this is a full path here, it will always find this here. Now, if I go into DWGC, you will see that I reference DWGB as a relative path and as an overlay, and my DWGA still shows my full path as an attach. Now, why this is critical here, let me go ahead and close these, and I want to show you the difference between these. So all I'm going to do here is I'm not going to make any changes to what I saved. I'm going to open up my file dialog here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the thing that makes me the angriest with most people is they'll come in here and they'll just randomly change a directory name. Oh, I have to close AutoCAD fully, bear with me. All right, so I'm going to change this webinar to webinar -2. So now I've renamed this directory. So now when I relaunch my AutoCAD and I reopen DWGC, all right, Maria, when you put it as an overlay instead of an attachment while I'm waiting for my AutoCAD to open, we will go back to my slides here. When you initially set this, you need to set this here. Reference type is attachment versus overlay. You can also change your ref path type system variable to change it to relative, because relative is the out of the box, or sorry, we're talking overlay. XREF type system variable, you change that to 1, overlay becomes the default. That's where we change those two things. So now that I have this open, I need to now go file open because I've changed the directory. And I'll go down to my webinar directory here. I'm going to open up DWGC. The first thing I want you to notice is that it found my DWGB, because my DWGB, when I open up webinars, right? When I open up this directory here, you'll see that my DWGB and my DWGA are in this XREF folder here. Because I used a relative path here, it immediately found my B and can't find A until I go back and repath it. This is one of the big things to understand on why there's a big difference between relative and absolute path. And if you're using absolute paths, if somebody changes a directory name at any point in this path, it will not find it. This is a common thing. I run across it all the time, right? And now I can just change this to webinar-2, right? And it will find it and reload it. Piece of cake, we got this. Do you make use of project name system variable for XREF pathing? I do not normally. And you can. I have not used that one simply because I find out if people are not using it, it makes more problems than it's worth. So now we're going to talk into some of the system variables and their usage. So the XREF override here affects display and plotting, works in conjunction with VisRetain. When it's set to 0, when the properties of the object such as color, layer, line type, whatever on the external reference drawing are set to by layer, any changes to the XREF layer properties are displayed in the current drawing. This is legacy behavior. If you have an XREF as an attachment, can you change it without doing it from 0? Yes. All right, let's go back here real quick. Let's go back to AutoCAD, right? You simply open up your XREF box, and I will actually need to open up this drawing right here. So if I go and say open DWGB, because this is where we did the work, as soon as DWGB finishes opening, you'll see this is attachment. I can click on the attachment here and I can change this from attachment to overlay, right? So I've immediately changed it to an overlay from the attachment. I'll go ahead and close this. Now, if I Q save this, once I've committed those changes, it'll tell me I need to reload down here. And as soon as I reload, that XREF disappears because it's no longer attached, it's an overlay. All right, let's go back to here. So when you have XREF override set to 1, when the visual properties of the objects on the external reference are not set to by layer, objects on the XREF layer is treated as if their properties are set to by layer, and every external reference layer can have its own set of layer overrides. Okay, so what this means to you, and I'll show this in actual example here, right? Because we have, right, I've set these 3 layers to be yellow. This property here was overridden to be a different color. So if I go XREF override and I set this to 1, what you're going to see is this object that had a different color associated to it is now treated as by layer and picks up my layer overrides. There's kind of a lot of moving parts here. So when you don't get the behaviors you expect out of your XREFs, this is going to be where a lot of it's coming from. So this is set by drawing. So this XREF override variable only applies to the drawing you have open. It is not saved as a system variable. It is only saved in the drawing itself. So, right? And it only applies to DWG XREFs, not other references such as PDF underlays or images or DGN files. Only applies to DWGs. VisRetain, this is the big one. So VisRetain controls visibility, color, line type, line weight, and plot styles. You use this in conjunction with VisRetain Mode, which will be the next slide, to manage which XREF layer property overrides you want to automatically sync. So when it's set to 0, the layer table as stored in the reference drawing takes precedence. So if you have VisRetain set to 0, every time you close and reopen your drawing, it goes back to the source DWG for the XREF and changes all of your XREF overrides to follow what's in the source drawing in the XREF. When it's set to 1 and 1 is the default, any XREF dependent layer changes made in the current drawing take precedence. So we can go back and look at this example here. So if I change that system variable, VisRetain, if I change VisRetain to 0, these lines right here will no longer be yellow, yellow, and yellow. They will actually go back, and let me open up that drawing. It will go back and show these colors here out of this XREF. So I know these are some concepts here that are a little big. I just want you guys to understand that this is where most of your trouble comes from. And VisRetain, is that a drawing variable? That is a good one. So VisRetain, if I remember correctly, VisRetain is a per drawing variable. No, it's a system variable. Sorry, VisRetain is a system variable. VisRetain Mode is a system variable. XREF override is a drawing variable. So VisRetain Mode, this is the other piece that works with VisRetain. The default is 0. Controls behavior when VisRetain system variable when it's set to 1. So when it's set to 0, no settings are synchronized. You will have the same experience as if you had set VisRetain to 1 in 2017 and earlier. These are additive values. So if I set VisRetain Mode to 3, on or off and freeze and thaw are synchronized. If I set it to 5, on or off and lock or unlock are synchronized. If I set it to 10, freeze and thaw and plot no plot are synchronized. David, yes, I will send this PDF to Lori. You will have her email address at the end of the presentation. You can reach out to her and you can get a copy of these slides. So these are additive values. So to sync all items, the number is 2047. So that is all of these numbers together. This is a system variable used in conjunction with this VisRetain system variable control which XREF layer properties you want to automatically sync on reload. If you have VisRetain mode set to anything other than 0, it will override any of your layer overrides or plot, no plot, color, line type, line weight in your drawing every time it's opened. So now we're going to talk about some of the other system variables and their usage. So XDWG fade control, this controls the dimming for all DWG XREF objects. XEdit controls whether the current drawing can be edited in place when being referenced by another drawing. XFade control and controls the amount of fading within a reference being edited in place. This setting affects only the objects that are not being edited in the reference. The XLoad control turns XREF demand loading on or off and controls whether it opens the referenced drawing or a copy. If you don't want, this XLoad control can get you into trouble in the fact that if you open up a drawing that has a lot of XREFs and it's set to also open the reference drawing, it will lock any of your XREFs from being edited by anyone else other than you. You've got your XLoad path, creates a path for storing temporary copies of demand loaded XREFs. This is actually also set inside your AutoCAD options. Your XREF control controls whether or not XREF, an external reference log, and XLG file are created. These are very helpful when trying to figure out where the problems are trying to load an XREF. You'll actually see things in the log, like if you can't attach an XREF and you turn this on, it'll create an XLG where it may tell you something like it's a circular reference because you have attachments, attached XREFs versus overlays. The XREF layer, this is a system variable that I have used very often. It specifies a default layer for new XREFs. It's always useful. This is very useful if you always have a specific layer for XREFs in your standards. So if you put all of your XREFs on a 0-XREF layer, you can set this XREF layer system variable right here, and it will automatically, whenever you add an XREF, automatically stick it on that layer. XREF Notify controls notification for updated or missing XREFs. That was that little pop-up I had down here in the corner that said, hey, there's been a change. You can turn that on or off. This one right here is the last system variable. This is the biggest one that I run into trouble with, the XREF RegApp control. Well, let me go back, sorry. Controls whether the registered applications or RegApps records that are stored in an XREF are being loaded, are copied into the host drawing. By default, if you open or if you XREF a drawing that has a bunch of RegApp garbage in it, it now becomes part of your drawing as well, and you're going to fight that. I always recommend changing this to 1 so that any drawing that you X-reference into your drawing, if it has a bunch of registered app garbage, it's not bringing it into your drawing. So if there's a problem, it's fewer things that we have to go through to fix. Now, if you have objects on layer 0 in the XREF, it will take on the properties of your DWG's layer 0, right? And I showed you that right here. This is a blue line here, because this line right here, as you'll see, is drawn on layer 0. When I XREF'd it into B, it becomes my properties of layer 0 here, which is white. The biggest thing that you're going to run into, for those of you that have ever brought in a Civil 3D file and can't figure out why none of the colors seem to work, if all of the objects in the Civil 3D file were set to default to layer 0, you're going to get some really odd behaviors that way. Usually it's a Civil 3D issue. Okay, if you do use full paths and rename a directory or change the location or a drive letter, the XREFs will not load, period. If you place the XREF in the same directory as the DWG you open, it will find them just fine, regardless of how it's pathed. The XREF, so simply put, when you open up an AutoCAD DWG, anything that's located in that DWG directory where that you open that DWG is added as a temporary path to your support path. So it can find CTB files, it can find PC3 files, it can find any reference templates, it can find any of your XREFs, images, etc. Danny, I answered this for David. Yes, at the end of the slide, you can reach out to Lori. Lori, I will send Lori a PDF of these slides so that you can ask her for a copy of these. All right, if you use nested XREF, be aware that any overrides you apply to the DWG will not pass through when it's referenced into a new drawing. Is there a standard to not place elements on layer 0? That's a much bigger discussion with CAD standards. Generally speaking, what I tell people or when I set up CAD standards is nothing should ever be drawn on layer 0. The reason why is that it causes all sorts of other behavioral issues. So for example, if you have dimensions and you turn off layer 0, you can no longer click and modify your dimensions, or you cannot click or modify things that are on the depth points layer. Things get a little strange when you start monkeying around and freezing or turning off layer 0, or locking layer 0. So I usually recommend that nothing gets placed on that layer for that reason. And again, that's a bigger CAD standards question. If you have layer overrides, and again, going back here, if you use the nested XREFs, those overrides that you apply in the drawing will not pass through. And I showed you that specifically, right? So when we're in here, these layer overrides here. So let me go back and put this back, right? And I'm gonna change this now back to an attachment, right? I'll save the drawing. Here's that XREF notify right here. And you'll see that those layer overrides did not pass through. That's a really important thing to understand. I've gotten quite a number of calls where people are like, well, I'm attaching an XREF and it's not holding my layer standards. Well, that's because your layer standards in here were another one. How come many blocks are drawn on layer 0? All right, that's a separate question, Christopher. Hang on to that. Short answer is if all blocks are drawn on layer 0, they will inherit the properties of the layer that they are placed on. If you put them on, let's say you draw a block that has everything on a tree layer and you move that block over to, let's say, a line layer. When you freeze the line layer, those trees will disappear because the block is actually on there. All right, what about saving a AutoCAD DWG to a new file name and the XREFs come along but is not wanted in the new DWG? Can the unwanted XREF be deleted or removed from the new DWG where it is not needed? Yes. Just open up your XREF dialog box, you right mouse click here and you detach. That gets rid of the XREF. If I detach this, it's no longer externally referenced into B and it's gone from here. That's the simplest method. All right, come back to slides here. Best practices. So from my years of experience, this is what I consider are my best practices. I generally recommend using relative paths. As a general rule, I like them. They work great. And what I usually do, and this is not applicable to everyone and not everyone can do this, but I always recommend having an XREF folder under your main DWG location, and that XREF is where you put your XREFs. This way, if I move or rename the directory that this drawing is in, those XREFs load, it finds them, everything. If using full paths, make sure to never move or rename directories or folders. Is there any difference how images are attached using image attach as they list as XREF? No, at the core of it, no. When you do image attach, it's essentially creating an XREF with some additional information. That's all it's doing. An image is a form of XREF. Okay, if you need to rename or move folders, there is something you can use to help fix some of your pathing issues very quickly, and that's called the reference manager. And then the biggest thing that I tell people anytime I'm dealing with CAD standards is you have to have a standard directory structure and you have to always use it. If you don't have a standard folder structure set up for projects, or you don't have a standard folder set up for how you do things, you're asking a lot from your CAD users and yourself to remember how you did things. Have a set of standards and follow them. If you're not following standards or you don't have them, think about getting those. So we're going to talk here about a quick bonus item, right? Can the XREF still be bound in the drawing? Yes, and I did not cover binding XREFs, but I can cover that real quick here. So in an XREF right here, so for example, I have DWG A and B, I can simply right mouse click and I can bind. Do I prefer the bind or insert option? Oh, that's a loaded question. That's a very good one, Robert. So if I go bind, you have a bind and you have an insert. So let's talk about these two options. I didn't plan on talking about these, but let's talk about these and their importance. When you bind an XREF, it will create or recreate blocks and layers that will all be prefaced with DWGB. So if I just do a simple bind operation, you'll see now that I have DWGA layers and I have DWGB layers here, okay? Here's the big thing, is if you're doing simple line work drawings, it's usually not a big deal to just use this, to use the insert, right? So let's go back. So if I go undo, and I right mouse click here and I go bind and I select insert, this is the one that's going to get you into the most trouble. If your XREF has a block name with the same name but different geometry than a block that you have in the drawing that you're going to bind it to, when you insert it, rewrites those block definitions to use your current drawing, and you will get some really odd behaviors. So if you have a block that's supposed to be a circle, and in your drawing that block is defined as a square, when you insert, it will change that block, all block instances in your bound. When you do the insert here, it will change them all to be squares because that is the current block definition. So just be aware, if you're dealing with a lot of blocks, always use bind. If you are just dealing with simple line work and you know that you don't have duplicate block definitions with different attributes or setups, then you can certainly use insert. That answer your question? The insert will also affect similar layer names, yes. So if I do a bind, it creates its own set of layers. If I do an insert, it will find, if let's say I had layer 1, 2, 3 here. So if I just do a simple insert, you'll see here that these layers now inherited what they came from. So this was red and yellow, and this maintained its color here. In my DWG, it was red and cyan. But in here, when I inserted it, these objects picked up my layer colors. Any way to bind an image? Short answer, no. Long answer, yes. And I actually have an article in the Resource Center, and we'll talk about the Resource Center at the end of the presentation. You can go there. There is a way to bind an image so that it's not an external reference. It requires a little extra work. You're not actually binding an image. What you're doing is creating what's called an OLE object, and you're adding it to your drawing. Just be aware, if you're doing that consistently or a lot, you can run into trouble with that. And sometimes it does not give you this, it does not give you an acceptable behavior. The other thing that will occur with OLE objects, if it was created in an older version of AutoCAD and you open up that drawing in a newer version with OLE objects, it may stretch or change those OLE objects. It may stretch or otherwise alter. Sometimes you have to go back in. All right, is there a way to just bring in a block from a different drawing and retain its properties from the other drawing if there is a block in the current drawing with the same name without X-referencing the other drawing? All right, Perry, that's a little more complicated. What you'd normally do in that situation is you would go into the drawing that has the block you want, type in the rename command, rename that block with a different block name, and then you can use Design Center, or you can simply copy and paste that block into your drawing. That's going to be the shortest solution for that. But you have to rename the block definition. If it has the same name, it is, when you paste it, it is going to use the existing block definition in the drawing. Unless you get a prompt where sometimes you may get a prompt depending on how you do the insert, where it will ask you if you want to override. If you override, it's going to use the new block definition and change all of the existing ones in the drawing. So that's a very dangerous habit to get into. All right, so when you're using full paths right here, we're going to talk real quick about the reference manager. Okay, so the reference manager allows you to quickly load drawings and update the paths of the XREFs easily. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and close my AutoCAD. Right, I'm going to close all my AutoCAD. I'm not going to save anything. Again, we're going to come back to here, and I'm going to come back into Webinar 2, and now I'm going to just change this to Webinar. Okay. So now we've changed the directory name, so we're not going to find it. So now we're going to click on our Start button. And we go down to AutoCAD, and you'll see that I have something in here called the Reference Manager. When I open up the Reference Manager, this is just a quick bonus item. You can add a drawing, and if I add DWGC out of Webinar, and I can tell it to automatically add all XREFs regardless of nesting level or only the first level. In my case, I like to add all. And what you're going to see here is this is looking drawing A, it's grabbing Webinar, and it's grabbing Webinar. If I need to change the path, what happens to the nested XREF when you bind the top drawing? It will bind them all. And I can come in here and I can do a simple find and replace, and I can find this path and I can replace it with a new path, hit replace all, apply the changes, and it will automatically update all of my paths. That's just a quick little 5-second on the reference manager, and you can also see what else is referenced in these drawings. So here's my XREF, so I've got this XREF here, and you may run into a situation where you do this and you will see little yellow triangles here where it can't find things, and that's where you go in. You can click on here, you click on the path, and then you do a find and replace, and then you find and replace on that. So that's the XREF. So let's go back and reopen up AutoCAD here. Reference Manager, is Reference Manager not part of AutoCAD LT? Let's go find out. So I actually have AutoCAD LT here, and I do not see the Reference Manager here. We'll just double check. No, you do not have Reference Manager as part of LT. You're going to have to do it in AutoCAD LT the hard way. Line type. Okay. So hang on just a second. Oh, yep, can't find this drawing specified because I changed that. We'll go back to here. We'll go back to here. Right. If I open up my XREF, hang on one second, Christopher. I will try to get back to that. Right. So you'll see that this is an attachment. This is an overlay. If I go ahead and click on DWG, right. Sorry, an XREF was modified. I need to not do that. All right, let's reload. There. Now that I can reload it, I can bind it. When I bind this, you're going to see that it bound my nested XREFs. Right? All XREFs are disappeared. Everything's bound. This is its own block. This is its own block. Or actually, this is one block when I explode it. This is now my geometry, and this is its own block that I would then need to explode to get to where I want. If you use Civil 3D, can you use AutoCAD's Reference Manager? Yes, you can. You can also use the one that's built into Civil 3D. So in my Civil 3D directory, you should also have a reference. You may not have a Reference Manager here. It may not be showing. Should be there. Yep, you have Content Browser, Data Shortcuts, Reference Manager. It may not show in your Windows pull down. This is a function of Windows 10. It's really annoying, but you should have a Reference Manager also installed with your Civil 3D. All right, Christopher, back to you. Back to my block question. Many times I get E and M drawings that have blocks in them that have had the color or the line type used changed, and then I have trouble overwriting the color without actually modifying the blocks in the XREF. All right, remember what we talked about in this slide. And this is probably going to be where you're going to want to take a look at is XREF override. Set that to 1 and see if that helps. Because your VisRetain or your XREF override may be set to 0. If you set it to 1, it should allow those layer overrides to work. That would be my suggestion for that. All right, Q&A time, guys. Although you've been asking me lots of questions during, hopefully I've gotten everyone answered to this point. If you do have any other questions, please go ahead. View res after setting to say 3,500 in some cases returns to 100. All right, if your view res is resetting itself after you set it to 3,500 and it returns to 100, my guess is you may have either a startup Lisp routine or something that is forcing it back to 100. That's a system variable and should never change once you've set it. So Billy, in your case, there may be something going on. Questions, line type scales in XREF. Is there something I'm not doing that's causing line type scales to become much larger or smaller than what I have it set to in the XREF drawing? All right, line type scales in XREFs. Usually what I recommend doing, if you are going to be XREFing something and you are using the newer style of annotative line type scaling, it's usually best to go into the XREF, set it to the same scale as the drawing that you're in for annotation scale. That usually helps clear up a lot of that. View res, Brett. View res, honestly, set it where you like it. Can the reference manager be set to only look for specific types like ignoring fonts or plot styles? No, unfortunately, Robert, it's an all or nothing. Either you get all of the, and it's important that you're getting all of the reference material, because this way you can also find out if you have SHX files that are missing. So if you have any shape files that are missing, which can impact either drawing visibility or drawing performance, it gives you an opportunity to see what is not being found with your current setup. Can I explain? Yeah, I'm still set to 0, can't override the color. I have to go change the block. No, Christopher, you want to set you want to set that, hang on. You want to set XREF override to 1, not 0. Can I explain the special properties of layer 0? Perry, how long do you have? I'm not trying to be funny or be a jerk about it. Layer 0 is by far one of the biggest stumbling blocks for a lot of people. Layer 0 is the only thing that you can never get rid of out of a DWG file. It is the common point of reference for everything. If you have blocks that you draw, I always recommend drawing them on layer 0. So when they are inserted into other drawings, they inherit the properties, that's line type, color, any of the properties that you have of the layer that you've brought them into. It gets more complicated when you get into some of the verticals like Civil 3D, where a lot of those styles are actually drawn on layer 0, but they're inserted on other layers in order for them to properly work the way you expect. That might be a good thing to talk about in the next webinar, is just really the special properties of layer 0. So I'm going to make a note of that. Is any way to control drawing units in XREF other than scaling? Nope, Claudio, there is not. When you bring it in, what it should do here in this box is it should tell you the block unit here and what it's scaling to. So if you're bringing in an XREF, so for example, this one that I have right here, I know is in millimeters, and you'll see that it does say it's millimeters. and it's going to scale by a factor of 0.0394. It's actually bringing it at 0.093 or 0.0393,700,787.4, but it's truncating to 4 just because of how many the decimal places it's set in the units. So it will actually pick that up here. If it says unit list, that means that nothing has been set up. Or the other thing too is in your AutoCAD options, this is one of the things that usually gets people under your user preferences, your insertion scale here. Default settings when units are set to unit list. So the source content and the drawing units. So if you know that you're dealing a lot with millimeters, you may set this to millimeters, and your target drawing units, which is your drawing, is inches, and it should pick up a lot of that. It's not perfect. Just understand that you're going to have to finagle with it. It does take a little bit. Set still can't override. Any way to control drawing units. Frequently create a detail, XREF it into a detail drawing, then I update the detail, change the layer color, and it does not update in my detail sheet. VisRetain is set to 1, so it's going to maintain the layer overrides I do in my detail drawing, which all the layers are extra, but I technically haven't done it. Is this an override thing? I apologize. Okay, so that might be something more where you are going to want to look at VisRetain should be set to, you may want to change your VisRetain to 0 in your detail and see if that changes it. If you still leave it at 1, set your VisRetain mode, and then set your VisRetain mode here to 16 so that your colors are synchronized if you're making color changes. That might be it. I'd have to look more in detail, Leanne, in order to see exactly what we may need to do. Can you have multiple line type scales in a different? Yeah, I can absolutely override the line type scale of a drawing. So a couple of things here in our standard properties box here, you're going to see my line type scale for the overall drawing is 1. I can click on this segment and I can override just this line type to, let's say, use line type scale of 50. I generally steer people away. I do have old school CAD people that still do it this way, where they use line type scale. Generally, I leave it at 1 and just let it go. There are some other things that we can use to control that. That's going to be a little different than what, and again, it'd be something that I'd have to see more of what exactly you're doing in order to give you some better advice on that. All right, once I have made a PDF file with XREFs in, I have trouble printing the file. I get stuck on flattening and won't plot. Is there anything I can do to fix this? All right, the flattening process is going to come from a number of things. That flattening process is part of your Adobe graphics rip engine as it's trying to create that file, or is trying to send it to the printer or plotter. One of the biggest culprits in that is non-rectangular viewports, images, and the big thing is having transparency values associated with hatches. That will cause a lot of that. The best way to get around that is to use something other than Adobe to do your printing. So for example, if you have Bluebeam, if you have any other PDF viewer, you'll find that those work better for printing. Let's see, I found that I can copy paste an XREF from one host file to another, but would like to know if the layer settings can be retained to replicate those in the first host file. All right, Mike, let me see if I've got this. So you want to copy an XREF from one drawing to another, and you want your layer overrides to follow, correct? If you want to do that, the only way you're going to be able to do that is one of two methods: either manually go in and set it. The other thing you can try is you can do, there's a function called laytrans, called layer translator, and you can try that. That may or may not work for you. And again, that's going a little off the topic here. Let's see, but it's usually a manual process to do that. Another problem I have is XREFing, civil draining, and all the block command messed up. I have used the civil object enabler and it works great until At no time or reason it won't let you save the drawing, so I have to uninstall the object enabler. Christopher, that's going to be an issue where I definitely, if you have support with us, definitely reach out to us. You may have something going on, or you may be running into something else. If you're using plain AutoCAD with the object enabler and you're having that issue, you may have something else going on. Leanne, you've only ever used VisRetain to 1. Okay, going back to here, you want VisRetain to 1, you want VisRetain Mode if you're changing the colors to 16. Not VisRetain, VisRetain Mode. President covered a lot of more complex settings related to XREF use and management. Some folks in our office are hesitant to use XREFs because they are intimidated. Do you have any advice to help people feel more comfortable with XREFs? So honestly, the best way to get people more comfortable with XREFs is that you need to start with a set of documented standards on how they need to be used and how to use them correctly. You can use this as, usually what I recommend is use the out-of-the-box defaults unless you want to change a couple of the system variables. Use them with the out-of-the-box defaults until you find a problem or you see that something needs to be changed, and then change it. Those are the kind of things, is the image. But really, you have to have kind of a path forward. And my best bet for you, Melissa, is to actually start with just a pilot project. One small project that you can use the XREFs with, get familiar with the whole process, have one or two of your people actually work on that project using XREFs and see any problems. Is the image embed command in raster design like binding and XREF, but for images? I'll be honest with you, Robert, I have not used the image embed command. I believe it functions the same, but that's going to be a little more raster specific. Is there any problems with accidentally erasing an XREF instead of detaching it? Yes. If you erase the XREF but still leave it as part of your drawing, it will still show up in your XREF manager. You will then need to go through and unbind it. Can you use layer states manager with XREF? That is a loaded question. Yes, you can use the layer states manager with XREF layers. However, if the XREF layers change, or you change the name of the XREF layers, or you add layers to the XREF and bring it back in, all of your layer states need to be redefined. Anything that's pertaining to that. So it's just one of those things. I've generally steered away from layer states in the past, just because they can cause some unwarranted and unwanted behavior. They do work. Don't get me wrong, I prefer not to use them simply because that's just how I have done it in the past. But they do work, and they do work with XREF layers. All right. Well, we're coming right up on closing time, guys. So, oh, I was late. Is there a link to the webinar? Martin, we will have this up on our resources page right here. If you've got the webinar, if you happen to see the screen, here's what I've covered so far, or here's what we've covered so far in just this calendar year. I did an AutoCAD command tips and tricks. I did an Autodesk software, what you need to know to work remotely. I did a what's new in AutoCAD 2021, covered a lot of the I covered all the new features in 2021. I did a live with Ryan Wunderlich session. This was actually a really fun one for me. This was one or two tips, and then it was basically a live Q&A for like 45 minutes. I did an AutoCAD versus AutoCAD LT. This really covers what the differences are between these two. I did one with AutoCAD and facilities management, which is really geared more toward facilities management. And then today's AutoCAD tips and tricks, all about XREFs. And so all of our on-demand recordings are available on our resources page here under AutoCAD, or you can go to resources.imaginit.com/AutoCAD. This is everything you need to know about AutoCAD all in one place. You're going to find a lot of information in here. As a matter of fact, I can probably show you what that looks like real quick. Right, and right. So just real quick here, here's our resources page right here. You can come into AutoCAD. Here's our AutoCAD resources. So here's actually a small video that I did that actually walks you through how to install AutoCAD 2021. This applies for 17 through 2021, walks you through the entire process that we recommend. Okay, and then you've got a bunch of blogs in here, as well as all of the videos that I have done. So here's our facilities management webinar. You can come down here. Here's my AutoCAD 2021 versus 2020 right here, AutoCAD versus AutoCAD LT. Plus a lot of blog stuff in here, specifically if you work with a lot of legacy drawings. So if you've ever clicked on a block and produced a large number of boxes in the preview, there's a way to fix that. So just real quick, that's where we're going. And again, all of that is right here. We do have some special programs and offers. There's an AutoCAD TradeIn for Perpetual from November 7th to January 22nd, 2021. You can save 20% on a 3-year term or 15% on a 1-year term if you switch from maintenance. Autodesk Q4 financing offer here. There's like a promotional offer. And if you have any topics you'd like for 2021, or you'd like to get a copy of this as a PDF, please reach out to Elliot at elliot@rand.com, and I will make sure I get this here to her directly. What is the command to attach a JPEG permanently to a drawing? That is actually covered in one of these. And embedding images in AutoCAD, how to avoid using XREFs. I actually have a blog right here that walks you through the process. Right,
that's again, awesome. Can you hear me, Ryan?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, good, okay. New series on February 11th. Of course, anybody who is in this database will get an invite to that. One of the things that we look for every year is to hear from the community and hear what you would like us to do. Ryan can come up with topics, but we love to hear from this community and bring you content that is relevant to you guys and to what you're doing in your day-to-day life. So as I end this webcast for the year,